Thank you. So my talk today is called Lean UX Agile's Brain? And it's going to talk about some of the common challenges that we see as a company working in a pure Agile development environment, and how Lean UX can sort of impact that. So first, what is Lean Agile? There's dozens of different definitions, if not thousands, but for the purposes of this talk, we're talking about incremental and iterative delivery, working from working software, and focused on teams and people over teams and how they work together. Rangleio, we are a Lean Agile design and delivery shop. We focus on modern HTML5 applications built with modern JavaScript. So we're in a unique position in that we do a very focused thing, and we do it many, many times. So over the last 3 years, we've probably done 60, 70 Lean Agile JavaScript projects. And in that, we've been building out our Lean UX design practice, and that's had a huge impact on how we interact with clients and how we solve certain problems. I mean, typically Agile sounds simple, but most people who have worked in it, especially in larger organizations, are generally pretty frustrated by it. It's not simple, the process is hard, and there's some pretty basic concepts that most people know. So you have a product, you want to build this thing, and to get it built, you've got to tell people what it is, when it's going to be done, how much it's going to cost, and what's the risk. That's hard to do if you haven't built it yet. And now you're talking about doing Lean Agile, you're supposed to be learning, you're supposed to be sort of figuring out requirements as you go. That's a hard thing for people to understand in a larger organization. And what often happens is you sort of get into your incremental and iterative development, but you do it more like this. You do sort of vertical slices and horizontal slices, and you're doing like database integrations, authentication, data API, social media. You do your first user experience, then you do your second user experience sort of module, or you do it in the reverse direction, and you go from mock-ups and specifications, and you build it out. The thing is, nothing ever gets shipped in this model. Nothing's ever really finished. And so the goal is to go more horizontal, and you're doing things that are features. So you might be doing viewing items, filtering by interest, viewing the details, bookmarking an item, notifications about new things, notifications about changes, and then you want to, say, buy something or invest in something. So you're doing these slices, and you're getting it delivered more rapidly, but it's a smaller feature, and it's hard to communicate what the sort of the whole scope of the product is. And generally, you do this across the various sections, and you're building it out sort of the same thing, but you're doing these thin slices, and you're getting it sort of shipped that way. But that doesn't really sort of fix the problem. That's the theory, and it's very hard to get that to work in real life. So what's really hard about Agile is building a team, integrating with the surrounding business context, maintaining your team, and maintaining core practices of Agile. And so that's the theory, but it devolves very quickly. Some table stakes and some of the things that fall apart are clean code, testing, communication versus specification, continuous delivery, and working software. Things shift rapidly to just get it built, get it done, give me guarantees, and things start to fall apart. Sustainable development is another key sort of practice in Agile development. That also goes out the window. Work weekends, work overtime, try to get it built. Everything starts to fall apart. You incur technical debt. Building a team, you get strong communication, quick discovery of user and business context. And high emotional intelligence to discuss issues. It's self-organizing. You can fix issues unique to that team. A strong bias to delivering value. A tacit understanding of the Lean Agile process. And highly effective team. So there's been some interesting studies out of Google and other companies that psychological safety drives the most effective team performance. It's the one norm that really carries across teams. So Agile tries to build that. The more interesting question then is, how can you break an Agile team? You provide specifications, but there's no communication. You have no process to discuss the specifications. You have low autonomy, self-direction. You have unrealistic schedules. You have pressure to estimate accurately, and your team is overworked. And so we've discussed two things here. One is the product delivery process, where we're trying to deliver value continuously, and then building an effective Agile team that's trying to actually deliver that value, and this falls apart a lot. Most of the issues are about the process at a high level, not about the team. It's about entropy that sets in an Agile process. And so that's where a solution requires a lot more thought. We need to look at the entire system. And so this is where Lean UX starts to really come into play, because it is the user experience discussions. It's how we usually discuss things with the users. But the other big impact it has is how you discuss things with the stakeholders. So the people who are investing in the product, they need to know what's going on, and we don't often talk about that. And so we're trying to solve for the user experience, but we're not solving for the stakeholder experience. And you have an Agile team that is really, no matter how good that team is, it's going to collapse under the context of the project. And the reason that this is really clear to Wrangle is because we do this over and over and over again. We've done 60 or 70 projects. We've done it with large banks. We've done it with small startups. We've done it, with regular software companies, small software companies. And the same team put in a different environment has a radically different experience. And so as we've worked through projects over the years, that is where we've ended up. So we can field not perfect, but we can field a really good Agile team. We have a product owner from the client who's responsible for feeding us features, but we have no connection to the users, we have no connection to the stakeholders, and the visibility from different parts of the overall context is very different. And ultimately, the stakeholder experience rules. So this is your typical stakeholder response to an Agile project funding request. It's like, you want me to give you all this money, and you're not going to tell me what I'm going to get, when I'm going to get it, you're not going to give me any guarantees, there's just no knowledge, there's no interaction, there's no conversation. And so what happens is we shift into this model where the stakeholder, in his need for scope, budget, schedule, and approval, is going to ask for that from the product owner. That's going to be delivered back, and that becomes the overriding context. So now, to get that scope, to get that budget, to get that schedule, the process ends up being, let's build a spec. And a lot of user experience work's done, a large spec is built, that's put together, it's signed off on, it's handed off to the team. And if there's any questions that come up, there's no longer an avenue to discuss it, because that's going to break the context. That's going to break the agreement with the stakeholders. And so now we're just feeding in this large requirement, and we're going to incrementally deliver it and iteratively deliver it, but we're not going to change it. We're not going to converse about it. And so we end up with a fundamentally broken process. The team starts getting squeezed to deliver more. They start doing more demo quality software instead of real high quality software. Things start to devolve. So testing gets dropped, clean code gets dropped. Any kind of really design that's based upon real feedback of real software gets dropped. And there's just really no real benefit to an Agile process in that case. So this is a typical conversation in a company where they've adopted Agile as they sort of thought, but it just doesn't mean more, doing more work with fewer people. It's like, so we need 3 more programmers. Use Agile programming methods because you get more done faster. And doesn't mean that we get more work with fewer people. And it's like, I don't understand. Come back when you have something that does say that. Some things that you'll often hear is like, oh, we're doing Agile well. We completed our last project on time. It's like, what? Like, what does that mean, right? So you're doing it well. You got it done on time, which meant that you cut whatever corners. You've specified it up front. You knew what you were building. You just did a waterfall project, and you called it Agile. You're lying to yourself, and you're not getting any of the real benefits. So what this implies, we got it done on time. Agile is working, and that's often the way you prove it. Okay, we'll let you do this one Agile project, and then let's see what we get out of it. It implies a fixed scope with specs and mock-ups, a fixed schedule, and raises the question, did any real conversations happen? And how to fix this in one slide. You solve for the boundaries. So what Lean User Experience does is it's creating a different stakeholder experience. It's working with the users, getting feedback from the users, and then having that conversation with the stakeholders. If you can shorten that feedback cycle, so you start a project, you have a small team working on it, you do enough UX to start shipping software, and now you're updating your designs, and you're working with the users, and you're working with the analytics, you cut 30–40% of the scope of a potential project because most of it's just guesswork. This is what we think we need to solve these problems. And that guesswork is really being demanded to come up with the scope of the project. And so you end up having the large user experience spec, and that's driving the whole process. But again, you can't just say, well, that's wrong, we need to do it this way. How is a stakeholder in a company, how are they going to sign off on something, or how are they going to feel comfortable with it? And it's not really about signing off on it, but really understanding the benefit and the accounting behind a Agile project and getting them involved in the conversation. So with the Lean UX process, we design something and we ship it quickly and we get real feedback. And so now if you can show, what the feedback is from users and what the innovation impact is of the software and the things that you were thinking of building that you're going to drop, so these have a very meaningful impact on the business. And now you can talk about the speed of delivery, the velocity of delivery, the amount of learning that you're getting. It's a different kind of an accounting mechanism, but there has to be a way to actually bring that into the business. Now, some companies have a hard time doing that because their business is split into the actual business side and the IT side, and they don't have very good communication. So this stakeholder experience context can be quite hard to solve, and it requires working to get that built out. The challenge, if you're trying to build an effective team and you don't have a good stakeholder context, you're not going to actually build an effective team because of that sort of breaking that's often going on, that entropy. And so being able to produce a team, have that team protected, work in a truly agile manner, and once you've done that, as you try to scale that across an organization, then you need to really solve these boundaries. And there's a lot of friction. So you can have a team that's very successful on one project, they try to move on to another project with different stakeholders, and you start to see a lot of friction. And that friction is really where the challenges are. And that's where Lean UX solves those problems because you're focused on the analytics, you're focused on incremental design, shipping quickly. So traditional user experience in the tyranny of the spec is that you have a mock-up. You have to say, what are we going to build? This is it. You get a sign-off on that. From this, it's very hard to actually deliver units of value because you're focused on screens. It destroys your ability to deliver small, high-value features. It's replacing conversations. It's replacing value being delivered. Screens are big. You can't identify the value in the screen. You can't discuss why you're building it, and you can't prioritize value. You have everything lumped together, and you're not really thinking about what the outcome is from the user perspective. So it's too big of a unit. And so what you end up with is your unit of conversation is not equal to the unit of design, because you're basically taking all those conversations and you're building out a design. So now you've lost the ability to trace back to the conversation. Now, the unit of development is too big. This is one of the really interesting things where we're ingesting requirements from clients and we can't break them down because they're just delivered in a manner that nobody can identify what the unique sort of aspect of value is being delivered. And people can't even understand what you're talking about. So that's the other interesting thing. So when you have a spec and you have a screen and you now try to break out a piece of that, there's no reference to anything anymore. That screen was the signed off unit of value, and now you can't have that discussion. So what Lean UX does is it allows you to maintain a conversation on a specific unit of value, and you're starting with what's the hypothesis, what are we trying to do, you're designing to that. And the way you account for some of the other goals of UX and design is you build out the theory and the hypothesis and the style guides. And everything that you can factor out of the screens, you can put in a separate package. You have sign-off on the look and the feel. You have sign-off on the colors. And now you're moving into development, and you can pick specific things. What is the user going to do? What are they going to get out of it? What's the value? But now you're having the design conversation around the unit of value. You're having the conversation with the users getting data and with the stakeholder, and you've solved the end-to-end concern. And so you now have that unit of conversation equals the unit of design equals the unit of development equals the unit of validation. You also strip out a lot of waste. So here is a really good example of what you get when you break down a screen into a backlog for Agile delivery. You've got these features that are coming out of the screens, and you have a little bit of high value, but you've mixed in all of this low, medium value. You have a drop-down that classifies a user as being a partner or being a customer or being a high-value customer. These are sort of ideas that all get lumped together because, hey, we're building the screen, this is where it goes, let's solve for everything. And now you're going to do iterative delivery of this, but you just have no context to cut it up, change it, drop things. So specs drive screens, which are larger features that mix up high and low priority. And again, you can't have the conversation. There's something that the team looks at, they start building it, they don't understand it, you get some feedback from the market. There's no way to deal with it anymore. You're sort of just handcuffed to the spec. You get 30 to 60% waste in a lot of projects because of this. Compared to if you're working on smaller units of value, now you have the high value 1, high value 2, high value 3, and you've delivered all of this. You've delivered 80% of the value in a third of the time, and then you're probably just not going to even hit the low and medium features, because why not just keep going? You've delivered software, you've got user feedback, and now you focus on the next high value thing. Again, if you've done all your design up front and you have large user experience sort of project that's been done, you can't do this. There's just no way to do that because the people who need to sign off it aren't in the room. The process isn't optimized for it. You want to change something that the stakeholder signed off on, the business put their signature on it, now it's being changed. If you don't loop the user into this, then it's still just a matter of opinion. There is no validation process. So you can solve the user experience aspect of it, the user validation aspect of it by delivering fast, getting the metrics, getting the data, and then you can tie that into the conversation with the business, and now you have that end-to-end experience and everybody can work together. And so back to that unit of conversation is the unit of design, is the unit of delivery, is the unit of value. I mean, a funny fact, and this comes up lots, but it's really hard for people to embrace, is users can't tell you what they want. They can't tell you what's high value. You need to watch them experience the software. And this is for a wide variety of reasons. It's because people always give you positive feedback conversationally. People, their behavior is quite different. Something that they like immediately, they're going to hate it like a week later or a month later. When I started off working in workflow systems and enterprise context, the number one thing everybody wanted was, will this give me email notifications? I really want email notifications. I don't want to go into the system. Give me email notifications. And it got baked into the software, and 2 years later, I'm talking to clients, and this was like a generational thing. And it's like, okay, we like the software and we'll buy it, but can you turn off email notifications? Can you, I won't buy it if I can't turn off email notifications. Because the user experience in real life was just, I'm getting bombarded with hundreds of emails every day. And so the experience of software is very different because you have real data over time, and that has a massive impact. So traditional UX design increases scope because there's no way to learn what high value is versus low value, for one. Lean UX decreases it because you're focusing the conversation and the design process around the value. You're eliminating the waste. You're eliminating upfront work. You're not building an inventory of design. You're just doing enough design to get into the delivery of the software, and you're doing enough design work to keep the process moving. So a lot of what works well in software delivery, actually a lot of it does come from lean manufacturing, and thinking of it from a lean process is often more effective than trying to think of it from an agile perspective, because agile is really the Agile manifesto, and it's about learning and it's about working software, but lean is really about the end-to-end process, and there's a lot of value that can be driven, a lot of waste can be eliminated, you can have faster turnaround, and these are things that were proven extremely well in the manufacturing industry. But they were very hard to understand in the manufacturing industry as well. It took decades for North American manufacturing to catch up. It's hard to see waste in a process. So by splitting big UX into the design theory context, like a style guide, the themes, the playbooks, these are a lot of the things that are tied in with your mock-ups and your specs. And by breaking it out, you can now have that conversation separately. Now you can have small features around conversations, and this now feeds your delivery cycle. And you get it to users, and you get that feedback loop. So getting back to the premise of this talk, is Lean UX Agile's brain? It's Agile's context is probably a better way of putting it. It's a way of enabling the conversations in that same incremental and iterative manner and that's been a huge hole in software development. And we've worked in lots of projects with lots of large enterprises where they hired a UX design firm, and they did great work, but nothing was shipped, nothing was delivered. And then we inherit that, and there's just no way to reach back in time and have those conversations again, incrementally about the design. So trying to get a bias towards shipping, ship fast, focusing on the theory context, and then focusing the lean UX design separately. Now, we've had a few other projects where things have actually gone remarkably well, where we did work with a UX firm, a design firm, and their premise was really the ideation and the context. And then we moved in with a delivery team, and we put a lean UX designer on the team, and we were given the freedom to ingest the sort of that ideation and that experimentation that was done up front, but then really validate it all and run a true lean UX process in the context of that design engagement. That design engagement really shaped up the market sort of focus and got everything sort of lined up. And then there was that freedom to really learn and design, but that's often very painful in projects because people have already invested in the UX, into the design. They feel that that's what they're supposed to be getting, and they don't understand that that really was just exploring and getting the market context. And then you can move into the rapid delivery of software. The other thing rapid delivery of software does, which is sort of similar to Japanese manufacturing, is that it really surfaces all the pain points and all the issues and all the things that aren't working. Because if you're moving at a faster pace, things break remarkably quickly. You need to automate everything. You have to have the handoffs. You have to have the team knowledge, the team context. So one of the big sort of fundamental premises and requirements of a really effective Agile team, and the one that gets dropped the most often, is the team has to be able to solve all its own problems. So if you have a team of 6 people, and you have to go to the design group to get the design work done, and you've got to go to the back-end API team to get the API work done, and then you've got to go to QA to get the QA work done. You've got so many roadblocks. Now, they could possibly be fixed. So if you're measuring metrics on that Agile delivery team, and you're getting your design work done, and it's getting done in time, that means you can sort of deliver value at a certain pace. And we look at cycle time and work in progress. So from the time we start a new feature to the time we ship it, we want to have a cycle time under 3. So that means 3 days before, if that gets higher, if our average cycle time is 6 or 7, that tells us that there are severe process issues. Now, the process issues may be in being able to consume the original UX work and break it down small enough. The process issues may be getting sort of approval and feedback and closure with the design team. It could be the same thing with the API team, or it can be with the QA team, which is often the case. Or it could be all 3. And so we have a team that could actually be running at a cycle time of 2, and they have on prior projects. Now they're running at a cycle time of 9, and that drives work in progress, which means that instead of there being, with 3 developers, say 5 stories open, 5 things being worked on, we're now up to 25. And what that means is they've got a context switch between all of these items. They're working on one thing. Now QA comes back, and now they got this sort of disruption. Design comes back, they have another interruption. The back-end team comes back, they have another interruption. So now you have developers, instead of just focusing and getting something closed out and shipped, they're working on 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 things at once. And it completely destroys the team's effectiveness. It slows things down remarkably. So do you have the organizational context to solve for those problems? Now, when we start a project, sometimes we will see a cycle time of 7, and then it'll trend down. And that's where we really look to focus and drive improvements. And then ultimately, user feedback. If you can get the user feedback looped in, then that really closes the loop. And data gives people comfort. So the best way to get an executive out of a conversation is to give him data, because that allows him to make decisions based upon feedback. If there's no data provided, then he has no way to really feel sort of what's going on, and they're going to have to go with their opinion. And so that's when you start having that hierarchical top-down thing, which also impacts teams. And so there's like 10, 12, 15 things here that can really drive entropy in an Agile process, really block things, really cause problems, and that's where self-organizing teams come into play. And so if Lean UX can provide the validation and the stakeholder experience, and then the team can self-organize around these issues, and we're looking at that pace, that cycle time, now we have that end-to-end solution that we really need for an effective Agile team. So we end up with the unit of conversation is equal to the unit of design, is equal to the unit of development, is equal to the unit of validation. And this is what Lean UX really provides. It provides the ability to manage the context and manage the communication across the broader ecosystem. And that replaces the need for certainty, cost estimates, with an understanding and involvement with the stakeholder, feedback on value delivered and user engagement, and trust in the process. And then ultimately understanding of the journey and solving on the boundaries and not breaking the team. So for an effective stakeholder experience, you need to get the right Agile team built. You need to fix the spec problem because that drives massive sort of pressure and entropy in an effective team. You need to fix the context at the boundaries, and you need to provide feedback that creates a good stakeholder experience. So, one of our big initiatives this year at Wrangle is really focusing on how we deal with the stakeholder experience. So instead of dealing with stakeholders as, treating them as like they're out of touch, they don't get it, or just superficially getting the sign-off because everybody wants to be agile, we're really pushing hard and digging in deep on creating a stakeholder experience and going at that with the same enthusiasm that we've been going at user experience for the last 3 years. The alternative is to try to explain the process with something like this. So this is why Agile is great, and you walk an executive through this and they'll probably have an aneurysm. And I actually created this and I used it, and they nodded and they got it, but it doesn't stick. It's not something that's going to keep their confidence. It'll say, okay, that sounds good, let's try it, and then a week later they're not connected to the process. So here's another one, and I'm also guilty of creating this one. So here's the Lean UX design process. This is extremely complicated. It actually, conversationally, it worked well, and there's that buy-in, but it doesn't address the stakeholder experience. Selling a stakeholder on Agile and getting them to buy into it is not the same as managing their experience and having them involved in the process. And again, this is where Lean UX really, really impacts the process. So now back to the team and the context. We've moved from specs to no specs and conversations. The traditional spec now has that theory and context, and we're having incremental design that we can feed into the delivery team. That sort of flows through to the users, and we have these conversations going on at the boundary. So Lean UX is helping us solve for the boundaries by giving everybody an experience that's effective and getting everybody's feedback into the process. And that gives us this concept that when we're building out our team and our process, is we want to have immutable teams, but mutable boundaries. So rather than the team adjusting to the context, companies have to really invest in the idea that the team is going to work the way the team wants to work. We're going to measure how the team's doing on cycle time and work in progress. And if cycle time and work in progress are not going in the direction we want, we treat it as if the process is on fire, and we solve it by not changing what the team does, but changing the boundaries. And that really means empowering the team to solve a lot of the problems. So if the issue is the design group can't keep up with the team, put the designer on the team. If the API developers can't sort of provide the right level of service, put them on the team. Put QA on the team. Have everyone sit together and have that direct connection to the user, ship continuously, have the metrics, have the user test scheduled on a weekly or monthly basis, and keep removing all of the blocks until you get that cycle time and you get that sort of flow from a conversation about value to the design of what's going to deliver that value, the implementation, and the validation. So that's the talk. So I went a little bit faster because we started a little bit later. Any questions? I can't see anything because of the light, so. I saw a hand over there, I think. Yeah. So Lean UX is taking the principles of Lean software and Agile software development and applying them into the design process. So rather than doing user experience design up front, where you're going through everything, the user interactions, the user flows, the screens, the designs, the mock-ups, and building out basically the design of the software, it's breaking it down into more incremental, lightweight things that are really geared towards user feedback. So removing everything that's getting between having a conversation about a feature and getting it in front of a user. It's a strong bias to shipping software and working from working software. So design as a process treats the working software as actually the sort of authority on the design. It replaces the prior sort of early design work, and it becomes incremental design against a working design that's actually being used by end users.
I have a microphone.
Is this something that you would specifically apply to cases where there is already a software there or an app there? I'm starting to think, like, what about new developments? Like, if you're building something brand new,
Yeah.
it's hard to iterate on something that's not there yet. Or is this still applicable in situations like that? Or could you talk a little bit about how that might be a little bit different in those cases? Or is it the same?
It's the same. But it shifts. So there is a life cycle there. So the initial iterations would often be entirely in the UX space, where you're doing some design work, you're getting some users to look at the design, and you're getting feedback, but you're time boxing it to a week or so, just to get the high level sort of direction and validation, and then shifting into the delivery of features. And that's the challenge, is breaking it down to a size that can be delivered incrementally in a faster turnaround. So with a brand new project, we look to get software in the hands of users within 2 to 3 weeks, and then that gets to the working software. A lot of that still is very prototype, and then by the time we get, say, a third of the way through the project, so if we're doing a 15-week project, by the time we hit 5 weeks, we really do want to have that foundation of working software and start incrementing, iterating against that. But there still may be some broken aspects to that. There may not be some back-end integration. Some of that might be mocked out. By the time we cross the halfway point of a project, we actually want to be shipping done features, or maybe 2/3 of the way through, done complete features, so that we actually have working software that we can treat as released, and now every new feature is incrementally released in a true continuous delivery sort of model. So there's a shift over the life of that project. For existing software, the challenge is technical debt. It's really hard to be agile with technical debt. So if you don't have good code, if you don't have test coverage, you're shipping stuff, and you're shipping stuff to learn, what's going to happen is that you are going to learn, but now you have to make changes, and that's so painful because of the amount of regression testing and how long it takes to make a change. We've inherited some code bases where we had to change one screen, and it took 4 days to figure out what was happening in the code. It was such a tangled mess. And so that technical debt may impact the ability to work in a model like this on existing software. There's different ways of doing that, though. So what we normally would do is go in, componentize the software, isolate the new features, and then be able to work in a clean process for new features, and then find ways of fixing the technical debt over time. All right, I got 0 3 times, so thank you, everyone.